But anyways, Kennon, welcome. Thank you for coming. And we're really excited to hear you speak today. So let's clap these gentlemen and the other one, Jared.
Okay, thank you. Bonjour, good morning. As you kind of heard a little bit about my background, so I'll give you a little bit more in depth for those of you that haven't heard me speak yet. So basically, I consider myself pretty lucky. I remember my days at WDSS when I was there, and I've always, since I was small, I've always been on that edge of change. So what I mean by that is, when I went to WDSS, I was actually I got to partake in the last drafting class that they had in that school, because it was in that time of switch where computers were becoming big, right? So everything was being done by computer design. So I always like to tell people, when I learned to type on an IBM typewriter at that school. A year later, those typewriters were gone, and it was all computers. So, and why I say my whole life has been like this, as a kid, I'm very fortunate where I grew up at. So my father was a manager at a hunting club, a remote hunting club. At least it was remote when I was a kid. But one of the neat things is that our closest neighbor lived 3 miles further in the marsh than I did. And the cool thing about that was he had a dog sled. So I seen the very last operating dog sled. I got to ride on it when I was a kid. I did have, in my beginnings, the old way of life. I used to have to chop a hole in the river to get my water for my house. That was one of my daily chores. 10 years later, we had indoor plumbing, everything changed. And there was a lot of other changes that occurred at that time. So one, it's like when I first went to school, I used to take a boat to catch the bus to go to school. That was my initial beginnings. And then in the wintertime when the river froze, I put my skates on and I skated up to catch the bus. So it's hard to believe this day and age, and then looking at a person such as myself, that, wow, you started out like that. That was the last of those old days on Walpole Island. That's why I consider myself fortunate. But there's been many other changes. And the big drive why I'm here today to speak to you guys, I've witnessed these changes. So one of the things that I enjoyed as a kid, when we spent the day on the lake, there would be 150, 300 other families on that lake at the same time. So we would visit each other. Today, you don't see that. The other thing, since I started doing seminars, and I've been doing it for about 7 or 8 years now, the other thing I noticed was, as I speak to kids in classrooms, in different schools, I ask how many actually get out, hunt, fish, boating, tubing, and a lot of kids haven't. And I can testify to you that there's even people on Walpole Island that have never seen Lake St. Clair. They've never been to the extremity of the south end of the reserve. And some of these people are older than me. So when I hear things like that, and I see things like that, and I speak to people who have never been to the edge of Lake St. Clair, I'm actually kind of stunned, right? And this is why I consider myself very fortunate, was that I got to enjoy things a lot of people didn't. And so what I do today, and I've been doing this for several years now, a lot of it has to do with my kids, their friends, other family members. I take them out hunting and fishing as well, just to show them what's there, and that, it's for them to use. And then the other thing is that there's a reason to attach people to the land, and that's to help protect it. So yes, I hunt, I fish, I trap, I utilize the natural resources that are there, but I also give back. So what me and my family do, and we do this a couple days a year, is we go out and we collect trash in the lake. And every time we come across a bunch of balloons, which seems to be most common, pop cans, glass, things like that, we pick all that up, right? And we make a whole day of it, and then we'll have a picnic on the lake. But it's our way of giving back and helping take care of that. So one of the things that I think about, and that kind of actually governs my life. So I'm a father, I have 6 kids. And more recently, in the last couple of years, I've now got 3 grandchildren. So it's the grandchildren and my kids that I think about. It's like they should have that same opportunity that I did. And I look at you guys and I think the same thing. And it's a driving force within me that makes me do these things to help take care of our environment. So I think of generations ahead, and that's kind of a First Nations perspective. So it's not all about me, it's not all about Kennon, my equipment today, I bought it all, I should use it all, that kind of thing. It's not like that. It's like I go out there, I utilize those resources, and my first thought is, I need to make sure that this is going to be there for my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids. So when you think of things in that perspective, it changes. And one thing, the way I was raised at the age of 2, and this was my father's rule, was that all of his children had to be in a boat by the age of 2. So I can remember my life being spent in a boat, being spent in a canoe, camping out on the shores of Lake St. Clair in a variety of spots, not just Walpole. We went stateside, or used to before 9/11, but we had a lot of friends over there as well, and then going out towards Windsor, Tecumseh, Bell River, we knew people out there. So we used to visit all across the lake, and we got to know more people as they were out on the lake as well. So it was kind of like a lake-wide community, so to speak. And then if anybody was ever in trouble, you would help that person. Today, those things have changed. Lucky for us, some of those changes include having a cell phone. So that's kind of rule number 1. If you're going to go out in a boat, make sure you have a cell phone in the boat. So it's just kind of a safety thing. The other thing is you carry safety kits. I know for myself, my wife, we make sure we have a first aid kit in the boat. Things like that, right? So be safe, be smart about things. Common sense goes a long ways. But things are quite enjoyable once you get on that lake. So if anybody has any questions anytime, raise your hand. Jalwin?
How many dogs did it take when you were on that dog sled?
8. And they were all different sizes. So
Was your neighbor's dog?
this was my neighbor. So that was Myron Sword. He was my neighbor. So he lived further in the marsh than what we did.
Did you get to what do you have to do? Like you have to yeah.
Yeah, he would just basically tell them mush and the dogs would go. And then to make sure they didn't take off, I remember he'd put the sled up sideways, right, and lay it in the snow, and the dogs would just lay down. They just seemed to know. And they were different types of dogs. So some were lab mix. I remember 2 German Shepherds. He had one that looked like a small husky looking thing. And then one looked kind of like a Saint Bernard. But they were just a mixture, but they worked good together. So it was pretty neat. Like I said, I got to ride that sled a couple times. And those are some of the memories I get to cherish now. So, right? So I think if you want to see something like that, now you have to go to the Iditarod, right? But maybe one day somebody will do it again. The other thing that's changed now, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of tolling dogs, but this actually used to be a type of waterfowl hunting on Walpole, and I haven't seen it in probably 25 years. But basically, you had a East Coast Labrador. It was basically a lab with a short tail. They're very big on the front end. But the dog would run around in the field until the ducks would chase him, and the ducks would literally get within 5 feet of the dog and it would run back at you. Right? And then hunters would harvest the ducks as the dog came towards them. So to me, it's kind of a lost thing. The interesting thing about, and they call it tolling ducks, the interesting history behind that is that tolling actually was established on the East Coast. And it wasn't for hunting ducks in cornfields, it was for hunting ducks on the beach. So for whatever reason, a dog running along the beach attracted waterfowl off the ocean, and they would chase the dog, and hunters would harvest the ducks as the dog went by. So it's pretty neat. Some of the history is really interesting. Read up on it. I know I did. I wanted to know where it came from, and I wish it was brought back. So it was just very neat. Those are some of the things that have also changed. So I think I'm going to save that part for another seminar. I want to get back into fishing. So just a general question for you guys, and there's multiple answers for it. So somebody should get a couple of them. But what season is it? What do we do in the fall time? Anybody? Are you guys that shy? So what are the farmers doing right now? Harvest season, right? What else is going on? I know you guys hear the big booms out in the distance along the lake. Duck hunting. So what else is going on? There's other people out there. I see the big charter boats out there, Lake St. Clair. Fishing. I heard somebody say it. So yep, fishing. So the other thing, and it's getting bigger and bigger now, is camping. Winter camping in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's only been in the last 10 years that it's gotten more common. It's now spilling into Canada. We're seeing the same thing in Canada. So I'm the owner and operator of the campgrounds on Walpole Island. So we now have 2 year-round campers there. So we're starting to see those effects. It's pretty neat. I know I've done it a couple of times. I know me and my family, we rented a cabin. We went up to Temagami 2 years ago. We spent a week on a frozen lake. So we slept right out there in the ice bungalow. It was great. Loved it. Kids got away from video games, cell phones. Nothing worked out there. But it was... when we started, it was minus 20 the day we arrived. The day we left, we were at plus 3.
But was all in the inside, like in your cabin? It was all heated and everything?
Oh yeah, the cabins are great. They're awesome. Everything was propane heated. They did have the big solar panels on the roof of the bungalow. They had these big batteries inside. You could actually charge your tablet, your phone. They had the plugins on the wall, and the lighting inside was kind of like this building actually. So along these little rails, there would be strips of what do you call it, LED lights.
Oh, yeah.
So, and they were in these long silver strips, and it actually lit up pretty good. The nice thing about it, and I've never done this in my life, but I got to lay in bed. I opened the hatch in the floor, and I got to start fishing while I was laying down. So it was pretty neat. We didn't have running water, so we had bottled water. So basically the big 5-gallon jugs with a pump on it, but we did have sinks. The toilet, which was what they called, what was it? It was like a self-clean kind of thing, new technology, and they were heated. They were actually too hot. But it was pretty neat. We had a great time. We tried to go back. We were trying to go back again this year. Then COVID hit, ended our plan. So we're going to try again. Hopefully this winter we get back up there. But it was different for me. The ice was unreal. So that's the most southern ice road, which is Bear Island. I got to drive that, and it was pretty neat. My first time driving, and I do recall this. Asked my wife about it. She almost freaked out. We were driving along, and it had speed signs all across the ice. And we seen a grader, a full-size road grader, scraping the snow off the ice. So we got a little worried, but you could feel the waves when the freighter went, or when the grader went by. Then we seen another car, a very small car, like a small Charger, And anyways, they were doing probably about 100 across the ice. We were taking our own sweet time. The signs were about every 200 yards that said 40 kilometers max. So we took our time, but it was funny when the car went racing by, we could feel our truck bobbing up and down. So you actually feel the waves on the ice. So we were a little bit, my wife was totally freaked out. I wasn't too bad. It was like, we're still on top of the ice, so kept going. Seeing the community we were going to, and kept cruising along. So the time we were there, they were actually doing ice water rescue training. So what it means, they cut a big hole about the size of this cement pad here in the lake, and they put it up on top of the ice. It was 5.5 foot thick. So once I seen that, no more worries. I was quite comfortable with everything once we seen that. So it's pretty neat, those kind of experiences. If you haven't done it, I would encourage you to get back into or try something like that. It's very neat. The other good thing that comes out of that, and it's always a positive, is that it kind of bonds the family back together again. So this is the other change that I've witnessed, where when I grew up, right, we still had rotary phones. Our TV, for our first TV, was all black and white. What was the movie machines, the big flat disc? Beta? I can't recall what they were. But basically, if we rented a movie, it came in a disc about this big. And it slid in this machine, and that's how we used to watch movies. And we thought when VHS come out, that was the greatest thing. We had these big old cassette tapes. So then after that, right, DVDs, and now everything's online. So I've got to go through all of those changes, and then even video games. Anybody know what an Atari is? So I thought it was the greatest thing when we got one. I think I was probably about 8 or 9. I thought it was the biggest thing, and then Nintendo came out. We thought that was the greatest thing, right? So all these things carry on. But the other thing that changed, and I've seen this in a lot of families on Walpole Island, is you see that social hub being lost. You see those family bonds being lost. Even mom and dad, it happens there as well. Life gets to be pretty busy. There's a lot of changes, and then you guys, I know you go through this as well. Messaging friends and stuff is a good thing, but I'm sure from work you guys go home like I do, and you got to check emails. And then you look at stuff that you need to respond to right away, or what am I going to do tomorrow morning, right? You're starting to prep, so you're constantly doing things, and you forget about the simple things. And I think the simple things are the best things to remember. So take time, slow down, spend time with your friends. I encourage that with my kids. We have them over all the time. They go to their friend's house all the time. And then I make sure I have take time with each of them, so we get out on the land, whether we're hunting, fishing, trapping, camping, a variety of things, right? So even if it's just a boat ride for the day, sometimes we just go out and we have a picnic on the lake. Take time to do those things. You'll find out it's worthwhile. The other thing, and this is a personal experience, this is more recent for me, I started officiating a lot of funerals. And one of the things I look at in some of the experiences that I have is I like to utilize those experiences. And so I've officiated past friends, people that were relatively close to my age, that were fairly young at the time when they passed away. My mom's funeral, I officiated that. And I've done it for several friends because people like the way that I speak at those types of engagements. So one very important thing that I learned, and it was a huge perspective in my life and how I view life. Whether you pass away at the age of 19, for example, versus somebody that passes away at the age of 81, I'll use my grandpa as an example. There's one common saying that lives amongst all people, was that they either weren't around long enough or life was too short. So keep that in the back of your mind, because it is, no matter what, we don't have a say in what time and when we go, right? But one thing at the end of the day is the experiences that you have, right? And that's why I live my life to the fullest. I make sure that I'm involved with my kids, my grandkids, their friends. I've done coaching for baseball, but I'm trying to stick to what I know best. So when it comes to hunting and fishing, that's what I do. And I share all my fishing areas, hot spots, if you will, and then what works and what doesn't, and what time of year. So with that being said, you see all the stuff I have laying out here. Any fishermen, fisher ladies in the group? No, okay, well, it's about half. So, which is pretty good. Those. Oh, that's right. So who caught the most? This was like 2 weeks ago, right? Right on. Congratulations. I do a variety of fishing. Done it my whole life. From shore, in the boat, from a canoe, off the edge of buildings. So wherever I can fish, I do. And whether it's in the city or if it's in a remote area, doesn't matter to me. I just love to fish. Grew up that way, so that's just the way I am. Now, fishing can be very simple. Fishing can be very complex. It can be inexpensive and it can be extremely expensive. You see, ask my wife about it now. But so when I first started out, I remember the old Zebco 202 fiberglass rod. I think at that time they were probably like $4 or $5 for the combo. Today that same rod probably runs around generally about $25 to maybe $30, which isn't too bad versus what I have today. So I didn't bring all of my gear. I got quite a bit more, but I brought some just as examples. So this is what they call a bait casting reel. I'm a lefty, right? So this is basically a bass fishing rod. Pike, it's like a heavy gear rod. It's a heavy action fishing rod, very stiff. This one wasn't too bad. It was about $230, right? Whereas this one, this rod here, it's a Sedona reel. The thing I like about it, lifetime guarantee. But it cost me $580 for this rod. This is my wife's fishing rod. I've got more rods. I didn't bring them today, but this is going to be close here. So this is a standard, what they call an icon rod. It's basically a jigging rod, medium action. Again, Sedona reel. And this one here was about $420. I've got the tournament series of this rod. It's a blue icon. The rod and reel combo was just a little over $600 for the one. It's very sensitive, so if I feel a minnow, actually could feel a minnow bite on it, so that's how sensitive it is. So depending on the technology you use today, you can start to begin to imagine like how expensive it can be and how inexpensive things can be. So looking at a lure like this now is roughly about $25–30 just for the one. Versus the older days, a reel like this or a lure like this, about $8, $10, right? So, and the types of fishing that you get into vary. So here you see I have a very small, there's a small jig. This was actually I was using yesterday. And so that thing is like a quarter for that little wee jig head. But you get the picture of how expensive things can be and how inexpensive. So what did you guys use 2 weeks ago? Hook, sinker, minnows, worms.
Yeah, they're typically using pickerel rigs with 2 hooks.
Okay, yep. Actually, I got some of those in my truck right now. But okay, so we're roughly $5, $4 for that little pack.
I got a good deal, I guess. I got them for $1.
Oh, that's a really good deal. So again, you get the idea of kind of the cost associated with fishing and how much you get into it. Now, the other thing that's changed, I know there was tournaments when I was a kid, and you see a tournament that was a bass tournament for $5,000 was pretty impressive. You know, it's like, oh man, those are big shots. And these guys are running like $50,000, $70,000 boats. Now, today, boats that they run, upwards of $250,000. The tournaments that they have, I don't know if anybody's witnessed or seen the big tournaments that they've had on Lake St. Clair. So the big one that occurs now is put on by the World Fishing Network. It's $1 million tournament that occurs on Lake St. Clair. And you know it's on when you start seeing everybody in matching uniforms. So you see 2 guys in a bass boat. They'll be in bright green, bright orange, bright red, but they'll be matching suits. So those are big tournaments. I've got to witness it. I've seen the helicopters out there with the video cameras. I mean, everything's going on out there. If you're lucky, once in a while you get to speak to those tournament pros. I know I've met a handful in my time on Lake St. Clair. And so it's pretty neat. I now have one. Anybody know who Bob Azumi is? So he's a customer at my campgrounds. He's been there for 2 years. Wayne Azumi is a very cool guy. Last year, he bought a brand new bass boat. He parked out along the road. Kids were able to get their picture taken with him. He also donated to the local fishing derby for kids. So he's very community-oriented fellow. Gets involved, likes to donate to things like that. I think it would be great to bring him here or have him with me when I come here. So, but he is a very busy fellow, does a lot of wetlands and fishery restoration work. So, but I get to see him a handful of times every year, and maybe that's something we can work on for the future. But I'm also trying to get him to do a video on exactly like this. So actually, that's why I requested the video. So I can share some of this footage with him, right? And we can start to build on it. And just make sure that we keep you guys involved with the outdoors. So, any questions at this point? So I got one question for you, everybody here. Does anybody get queasy about seeing entrails, fish guts, stuff like that bother them? So I did bring fish with me today. I'm going to show you guys how I clean fish. What are we doing for time? Because I still want to talk about government.
Yes. It's only 10 after 12.
Okay, good. So I'll try to wrap this one up around 12:30, and we'll go on for about an hour for First Nation government stuff. Okay, so there's a variety of tools when it comes into cleaning fish. I have most of that stuff with me, and there's a lot of simple things. One thing to note, the simple things are easy to forget. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So I've got some hand sanitizer here. But some of the tools that we use, right? Anybody that cleans fish knows what these are. So these are all tools for sharpening a knife, right? So it's important to have a sharp knife. One of the things, and I'll explain this as I go through while I'm cleaning fish, right? But the knife has a job. Just bear in mind, and this is how a lot of accidents happen. The skin on a fish is very tough to cut. The tendency is to push really hard in a sawing motion, and you don't have to do that. The more experience you get, and I've been doing this for about 40 years now, the more experience you get, You find out there's just an easier way to do things. The knife is a tool, and if you know how to use it, it works quite well. So a lot of that, again, falls back to experience. There's different ways of cleaning fish. So I'm kind of the old school guy. The other part that's going to kick in here is kind of knowing some of the anatomy of a fish. So I know when I go home, if I take fish home, the first thing that my wife ensures is that I don't have any bones in that fish, right? And she knows what to look for, so she holds me to it. But I've been doing it for so many years. I've got it down pretty good. But it depends on the type of fish. So anybody know what a northern pike is? A pike. So that fish has what they call Y bones in it. And it's literally a bone in the shape of a Y. And they've got 2 sets right on each side of the fish. If you don't know how to clean that fish right, you can actually get in a lot of trouble. It's a very bony fish. It's actually a good fish. Cleaned properly, they're pretty good. Cleaned improperly can cause a lot of trouble. I know in my younger days, I recall my mom, she got one of those Y bones stuck in her throat, right? So she tried to eat a piece of bread to dislodge it, and it didn't work. She actually had to go to the hospital and have it surgically removed. So those types of experience I'll share with you. Keep that in mind. Whoever your fish cleaner is, or if you're the fish cleaner, I'll show you how to do it the proper way. And if you have questions as we go along, I know the last group wanted the heart, right? Everybody was fascinated with a fish heart. So for whatever reason. And then there's different ways to clean fish. My neighbor that lives right beside me, guy's an amazing fellow. He can actually clean a fish upside down. I haven't learned to do that. People have their own way of doing things. I think that's fine. As long as you make sure that you keep the bones out of the meat, everything should be just fine. Just so you know, we were talking about the different types of seasons. So these little rods serve a purpose for me in 2 different seasons. So they're basically ice fishing rods, but I also use them for what they called an old style of fishing, of what was called chugging. So it's basically a sinker, a big silver sinker with a treble hook on the bottom. That was most common when I was a kid. Some guys refer to it as tight lining. I know a lot of Americans will say that. So it's basically string hangs over the side of the boat and you're kind of yanking up and down on this thing. And you do it all day long. Some days it's effective, and other times go back to something like this.
Does that go for any type of fish? Like that you're chugging?
Yes, yep. So it'll vary. For walleye, it's a very big hook that goes on the bottom, a treble hook that goes on the bottom of a big sinker. For other fish, and it does work pretty much for all fish, you've got to change the size of your sinker and the size of your hook. So they do chug for perch, more common in Lake Erie than here because it's a shallow water lake. But it's basically used for kind of deeper water. So they do it for panfish. Some areas they do it for lake trout, further north of northern Ontario. The big rock lakes up that way. It's very effective. There are different techniques out there. A lot of times if you see somebody floating along the river in Lake St. Clair and you kind of see them doing this, but you see them holding nothing, and you think that they're kind of out of their mind or whatever, they're actually holding on to a piece of fishing string, and they're yanking a small jig or a chugging line. So you'll see that things if you get out there enough. The other thing is that, I was talking about the different areas that you can fish. So right now, for the last 3 years, the St. Clair River has been completely amazing. If you drive along the river at nighttime, you'll see these big bunches of car all along the highway. They'll all be congregated in certain areas. I know the hydro plant is one. The small bridge just before the old Samba ferry site. There's a couple of areas up. I know Amjanong First Nation. You see a lot of cars there. And all these people are all walleye or pickerel fishing, which is one of the target species for our area. And there's literally people shoulder to shoulder all along up there. But it's amazing. The amount of fish that's there is just incredible. I know personally, between me and 2 other friends, we've caught over 200 in about 4 or 5 hours. So there's some things that are happening right now. I know.
What were you using for that?
These guys right here. These little rubber minnows, which they call finesse minnows, on a 1/4 ounce jig head. And there are techniques. So a lot of guys you see kind of cast the line out and reel in real fast. Don't do that. Cast out. The current in the river is very, very strong here. It's actually one of the strongest in all the Great Lakes. So one of the things you do is you cast your line out with a lure like this on it, and you let it fall. Let it go all the way to the bottom. If you have rods like this, and you actually have your finger on the string, you'll feel that lure touch the bottom. And then as the current pulls on it and tightens it up, lift your arm about 1 foot and let that thing float right across the bottom. 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get a fish. But everybody else you'll see up there will be just cranking on those lines. And sometimes you'll see them, they'll be cranking a lure like this, right? So these are basically what they call body baits. It's got the big flat plastic in the front, which makes this thing dive down, right? And then it'll level off at about 15 to 20 feet on average. There's a variety of sizes, colors. Those are okay. The problem with the St. Clair River is there's a lot of busted cable in there. The other thing that's there is a lot of railroad ties. Once these things get hooked, these types of lures, chances of getting them out are next to nil. I know I lost lots up there. The other thing that's there is you get to the northern extremities of the river, a lot of rocks. So I've got quite a few lures hanging up there as well. So if I'm going to lose something, I try to stick with a single hook. I know a lot of guys will trailer this with what they call a stinger hook, which basically hooks onto this front hook, and then there'll be a treble hook on the tail of this. When fish are biting light, is what they say. They're basically just kind of nipping at the tail. If you put a treble hook on here, you have just better chances of hooking the fish that you're after. But other than that, there's a variety of things you can do. Again, I'm going to tell you some of my little secrets. One of the things that I carry in my boat, and it's still on it right now, is garlic spray. So the cooking spray, right? Get that. If you can get it in its purest form, the more pure it is, the better. Use that stuff. Spray it on your lures. I know for lures like this is what they call a tube jig. It's hollow on the inside. I'll actually take that spray and I'll put it inside of here. A big, huge tournament secret. Any tournament bass boat will have this stuff on it. And it really does work. It seems crazy, but it works. There's a scent trail that's left that attracts fish. So most bass guys, right, are targeting bass or bass fishermen. The other things you're going to catch on there will be things like pike, muskie. I have caught rainbow trout, catfish, silver bass. What am I missing? Dogfish or bowfin, and sheephead. All off that same lure using that same stuff. So it really does work. It doesn't It's not going to be specific to one type of fish. It's just that it's just one of those things, one of those little secrets that people don't tell you about. The other thing is it this one? Yeah. Right? The other thing is they put rattles in these now. Fish are very sensitive to these as well. So it's kind of all whatever species you're chasing, the area that you're chasing will determine what tackle you get. And if anybody has, I guess, any other questions, so using live bait, I do that as well. Not as much as before, but I still do. So it's using night crawlers, leaf worms, wax worms, crickets, what's the small red centipedes? That's getting to be more common now.
Can you buy those or you gotta go find them?
Better off to find them. You can buy them, but you have to go places like Bass Pro. So now you're getting up by Toronto, right? Barry, Cabela's. They carry types of baits like that. They used to do it around here. It's not as common anymore. I don't know why, but it's big in the States. The other things that they use, leeches. Leeches are good to use. A lot of people don't like touching them, but they're still, actually they're a better bait now than versus the 80s. The reason why I say that, everybody knows what a goby is, right? Did you guys catch some 2 weeks ago? So they're everywhere, and they love worms. They like stealing bait off your hook. The nice thing about a leech is they can't tear it up. A leech is too tough, but they work when you're either bass fishing, walleye fishing, or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I think we're going to get ready here now to clean some fish.
How many people have actually cleaned a fish in their life?
Ooh, not many.
Me neither. I have bones all over.
So there are different types of equipment now. Anybody ever see a barrel scaler or ever hear of a barrel scaler? So it's basically this huge drum. It sits in a big square trough. You fill it about 30% with water. You drop your fish inside this drum and it turns. And inside that drum, there's like kind of like small metal tabs that sit inside there, and it actually peels the scales off the fish. So you can put about 20-25 fish inside these barrel scalers. You let it run for about 15 minutes. It knocks all the scales off the fish. You can pull it out, and then you can either flay them or cut the head off, whatever you want to do with them. So that's kind of a big thing. The other thing is you see guys using electric knives. I did for a while. I learned probably, I was like 12 or 13. And I did it for about 10 years. The problem with that I had was I would always leave a couple bones in my fillets. And I could never resolve that problem. So I went back to the old school, went back to the standard fillet knife, and figuring that, it was something I knew how to use it quite well. So I went back to it and I was like, stick with what I know. So me and my wife celebrated our anniversary yesterday, our 20th. So we decided to go fishing. So I've got different species. Anybody know what this is? Any guesses? Look at that mouth. Largemouth bass, yep. So everybody's got to know what this is. That's what you're catching, okay. How about this one? Anybody seen one of these before? So that's a bluegill. And then, anybody know if that's a male or a female? No. So this is one of the ones that's easy to tell which is the male and which is the female. So basically your males, this part right here is going to be like a bright orange, almost like the color of that fin. Will be this color right here, will be the males. The males will always have the more brighter colors on them. The females, their entire body will be lighter in color, always. So just kind of a tidbit of information. I've got another one in here somewhere. Everybody's got to know what this guy is. Anybody know what that is? You say sunfish?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sunfish, if you look it up in the book, this is going to be listed as what they call a pumpkin seed. And again, the same thing applies here for the males and the females. So this one here I'd say is a female, just generally brighter in color. The males are going to have a very dark, rich color on the belly. This will be like a pale yellow, but more solid in color. So this is a female as well. Then everything else I got in here is a perch. So we'll go through these 4 fish here. Cleaning this fish, I can tell you right now, the toughest fish to clean here is going to be this one. Just because I know the body structure inside of this fish. Basically, pumpkin seeds are sunfish. The anatomy is a little bit different in that the rib cage almost comes out to the skin of the fish. So it gets very thin. It's kind of tough to cut around. There is a lateral line. This is going to be a good fish for an example. So basically, you can see that black line along his body, right? That goes from up here. It's about midway, comes down to the tail. And that's what they call the lateral line on a fish. So really on the inside, in the meat of the fish, there's a bone structure there that follows the length of that fillet. And what was most common, I know when I was small, we didn't bother with that. We left it in there. It was common to just pull the bones out after you cook the fish. But now, in probably my last 30 years, I flay that part out so I don't have to worry about it. And that's actually people's preferences. Especially with kids. I know with the way I was raised, my grandfather refused to give us kids, probably when we're 5 or younger, fish that had bones in them. So there was actually fish that didn't have bones in them. And that's all we were allowed to eat when we were kids. So today, I never did that with my kids. I learned to clean fish. Basically, I'm the cleaner in my family. My boys kind of know how to. Still got some work to do for them, but they're getting there. So the only way to learn is to get started, to actually start doing these things. So with fish, right, they all got scales. Most of the fish you're going to be cleaning are going to be like this. Like I said, having a sharp knife helps. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow these scales, right? If I follow those scales, see how easy that cuts? And I've got my knife on an angle, right? So I stay underneath those scales. And I'm going to come up just below these fins here. So now I've cut down to the side, to the center of the fish. I can feel that bone down there. I'm not going to go any further. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow it up along the back. So if you get close to this fin, their dorsal fin, close as you possibly can without cutting through it, and just follow it along the edge, there's actually a ridge here where there's no scales. So I'm not cutting through any scales. It's just the skin of the fish. And then when I get down to where the rear 2 fins start, so the bottom fin is here, right here, I want my knife to poke out right alongside of that fin on the bottom. I'm going to go through the one on top. So I'm just going to push straight down, nice and easy, goes right through. And now I'm going to put some slight pressure pushing down and work towards the tail of that fish, right? So my knife goes through. And now I'm going to work my way down to the spine of the fish. And basically all you do is you follow the bone structure. So I'm now down to the rib cage. I'm going to start working my way out. And as I do, I hit that lateral line. So this is the bone that runs through the meat that I was telling you about. See, I'll get through this guy first. So I'm going to go on the back side of that lateral line, and I'm going to just work my knife all the way along there to go towards the head. I'm going to continue on following that rib cage, working my way down to the belly, and then I'll take that fillet off. So as you can see, as I did that, you kind of see the skin of the fish here in the center. I've actually taken that lateral line out. You can see it across here. Some people think that's wasting meat. To me, it's just cutting the bone structure that's in there out. So that's a very clean piece of meat the way that is there. So on the carcass, now you can see that lateral line. That's all bones there. And this is one that normally everybody cuts through and leaves it inside of the meat of the fish. And they're very thin, right? So you can cut through them. The problem is that when you go to eat that, they can actually cause a little bit of problem. I know I've seen some fishermen, what they do, and I'll do it on this side. So I'll take this next fillet off and I'll leave that lateral line in, but they just remove it at a different time. So again, it helps to know the anatomy of the fish. So now that I've hit that lateral line, I'm going to leave it on this fillet. I am going to remove it. I'm just going to remove it at the different part of the process. Right, so that bone is still in there. So on this side, right, so now you don't see that line of bones. I've cut it off. I've left it in the meat of the fish. So what we do next, now we got to remove the meat from the skin of the fish. So kind of a sawing motion, pushing down, not super hard, but firm. Right, so now I've taken off the meat of the fish. There's the skin. So now what I'll do is, and this is where you kind of got to know where to cut the fish. You can't really see that bone structure. You kind of just got to know. One of the things to watch for is at the tail of the fish, you see a small red line, and you'll see this in every fillet that comes basically straight out on the fillet. If you stay on that line and cut, you remove that bone structure, right?
Like right in the middle there, it looked like almost?
Yes. So if you look at the fillet now, and maybe it's easier to see on the back side. So you see the lateral line here that runs the length of the fish, right? So all I've done is come down about halfway and remove that bone line that's in there out. So that's one way of doing it. Now with this one, I don't have to do that because I've already taken that bone line out. Right, so that one is done. Now I don't know if you can see it. Does anybody know what a freshwater mussel is? Clams? Has anybody ever seen a clam? Has anybody ever seen a clam larvae? This one has some in it. So you see these little yellow dots right here. So if you guys have a look, there's one right here. And there's another one up here. So those are essentially baby clams. That's how they start out.
Inside a fish?
Inside of a fish. Every clam has a host. There are 27 different species of freshwater mussels. Huh?
How did they get out?
They'll exit under the scale of the fish. So when they start out, generally they're in the fish. A fish is a host for roughly about 10 months. They'll come out of the fish.
Does it affect the fish, or they
No.
don't even know?
Nope, they don't even know.
Riders. Nice.
Pretty neat, eh? So there's some neat stuff to be seen.
Do you have to clean those out, or do you just?
You don't have to. A lot of people do.
How big are they when they come out? Like,
About that size.
about that size? Will
Yep.
you exit the fish?
And then what they do is they'll drop down into the sediment and they'll start building their shell.
So do they find the fish?
Yes. They free float in the air.
It's crazy. It's mind blowing. No idea. Never knew this happened.
So one of the things that they did, because most freshwater clams, and then just clams in general, right? So in the southern United States, they're all endangered. So a lot of that's due to zebra mussels, which basically, once they latch onto a clamshell, that clam can no longer breathe and it can no longer eat. So they started kind of wiping them out, and that's kind of just nature doing its thing. And so what they started was, and this took a long time, they've probably wrestled with it for about 20 years, but they figured out how to grow clams. So what they do is they take host fish, put them in a cage, and at the bottom of that cage, there'll be a bed of sand. And they actually start by keeping the host in that cage to make sure that they release those clams into that sand. That's how they establish the start of young clams, right? So once they're juveniles and they get to about an inch in length, they release them. So it's pretty neat. It took science a long time to figure that out. But now that they can do it, they're actually starting to bring certain species back. So that's a good thing. But it took a long time. They didn't even know that fish were hosts for clams. So neat things. There's neat things to be seen in nature. Once you start to understand those relationships, you know, it can be pretty cool. So I know, and my kids will tell you, they thought I was pretty weird at first. Because one of the things, like one of our favorite trips was just local, going to Kingsville. Anybody know where Kingsville is? All right, so we went to the big goose sanctuary there. It's always probably twice a year that we go. So we try to catch the fall migration, which should be any time right now. But you would literally see some 200,000 geese passing through there. I know we lucked out about 3 times when the primary flock came in, all at one time. Then we tried to catch the spring run as well. So there's like a little, kind of like a rearing pond. They have a small pond there where you can actually go feed the birds. We go to Canatera Park all the time. We feed the birds up there. My kids, it was very, very interesting for me, was that the one time we went duck hunting, right, the one day, the very next day we went to Canatera Park and we were feeding the birds. So my son, I think he was 6, maybe 7 at the time, and he goes, "Dad," he goes, "how come we feed the ducks here and we just shot some yesterday?" Right? And I had to think about this a long time, and because I didn't want to give him the wrong answer. I just never was posed with a question such as that. And all of a sudden it dawned on me. It took me about probably 2 or 3 weeks to think about not just was the right answer, but kind of why did I do things like that, right? I had to think about that. So one of the things that I was taught growing up, you know, it's okay to take, but you also got to give back, right? So this is where I've been involved with habitat management my whole life. For me, it's one way of giving back. Pulling the trash out of the lake is a way of giving back. right? And then only harvesting what you need, right? You can't take and take and take and not give back. The resource will disappear on you. So I started explaining that to my son. And the other component, and I think this is true for everyone, if there's ever a key message I could give you guys today, doesn't matter if you live in a city or if you live in a remote area of Ontario, just keep this at the forefront of your mind. Just remember that you're always a part of the environment. You're never separate. You're not above, you're not below, you're a part of. So everything around you, you're a part of it. And that's a First Nations perspective and the way we look at things, right? So if you pollute that river, you're polluting yourself, right? If we pollute the land, we're polluting ourselves, we're polluting our homes. So just keep that in mind. It's not to scare anybody, but if you look at things from that standpoint, you have a greater appreciation for everything that's around you. So think about it that way. And my kids can all tell you the exact same thing. So I make sure that they're aware as well. So I'm going to clean this bluegill next. It's basically going to be the same as that sunfish. So put my knife on an angle. I'm going to work my way up the back. Okay. So every fish, when you clean a fish, doesn't matter what species it is, what's going to be the common practice in all of them is you're going to follow the bone structure of the fish. Generally from the top down to the bottom of the fish, with the exception of my neighbor, who's like a magician that can go from the bottom up. So it just depends on what your preference is. Some people do what they call a butterfly fillet. I'll do that on one of these other ones. It'll be easier. So I end up with that. So some of the cleaning tips that I can give you, again, simple, but kind of necessary, especially this time of the year when the bees are quite prevalent. Keep a bowl of water beside you, put your fillets in there. One of the neat things that happens if you don't do it, if you watch a bee, for whatever reason this time of the year, they turn into meat eaters. And I've seen it where the bee would kind of cut off a corner of the part of the fillet and fly off with it. Yep. Right, and I thought they were just interested in pollen, but I know sometimes when I clean ducks, same thing. The bees will cut a little piece of meat off the duck and they'll fly off with it. Don't ask me why, but they do. So if you get good at it, right? See how thin that is? Kind of clear looking. Knife goes through pretty easy, right? You know you're good when you can get them that thin. So I'll do this perch next. So basically, body's more elongated. It's the same process as what I did for the sunfish. What I'm going to do is what they call a butterfly fillet here. Again, put your knife on an angle, right? Ease it up under the scales. It's when you're pushing hard and the sawing motion, that's when you get yourself in trouble. It's when accidents happen. So again, I hit these rear fins. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go just outside the spine of the fish and then work my way towards the tail. Again, I'm going to follow the bone structure of the fish. Go from top to bottom. So I've hit the rib cage. I'm going to work my way out straight and just following the bones, following that lateral line. The nice thing about perch, these bones stick out a little bit better. They're kind of black in color, so easy to see. Once I hit those, I'm going to bring my knife up underneath them. Again, working from the tail towards the head. Slightly lift my knife up, twist it, pull those bones out. Continue on down the rib cage. Aha! We got a female. So I don't know if anybody's seen fish eggs before, but here they are.
All in there?
Yep.
How many would you say is in there?
Oh, probably close to 1,000.
Really?
Yep. So each one of those little white dots, if you get up a little bit closer and have a look at that, each one of those little white dots is one egg. They do.
People do eat them, eh?
Yep, I do. Our family does.
How do you cook them?
Fry them just like a fish. The other thing you can do, and I've done this.
It has a whole little sack like that?
Yes. Make sure if you do that though, you've got to poke holes in this or it'll go boom. It'll explode. Yep.
Can you fish with them too, or is it mostly?
No, you can fish with them too.
Ew, seriously?
Yes.
So you just put that in a hook?
People use salmon roe, but I wasn't sure about perch.
Yep. You would use this for like catfish and stuff like that, bottom feeders. And the best thing to do is to put that in the fine mesh, like a cheesecloth, right? Just like they do with salmon eggs. You do the same thing with those. So if you hear somebody talking about doing a butterfly fillet, basically all they're doing, right, is this. It's exactly what it looks like is a butterfly.
So you're getting both sides out.
Yep, and they leave them attached, right? So that's just kind of the preference. So again, on here on the perch, you can see that I left a lateral line bone in there on the sides. Just go basically out, back down, and continue on down the rib cage.
What's the heart look like?
The heart is way up inside here,
Open its head?
in front of the pectoral fin. So basically, I'll start up here, and I'm going to come down.
How do you guys not have these questions?
Oh, that's the other thing, and I just learned this 2 years ago. A customer of mine out of London, he keeps this portion off of pickerel or walleye, and he skins it like a standard, like a regular fish, and it's pretty neat. There's actually quite a bit of meat there. I never knew that. I thought it was all bone. And but
I've heard people like doing the sheets on pickerel.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the heart of a fish is always going to be up in front of the pectoral fins.
It's like its head, isn't it?
No, not behind the eyes. It's below the gills and in front of the pectoral fins. I'm just trying to get it dislodged here.
Behind the throat?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I guess if you think of our throat, ours is right there. Oh, kind of makes sense.
So now we got a heartless perch, but that's it. So it comes from way up in front here. There's a little protective white layer of skin that'll be up here. You always find the heart of the fish way up in the front.
Do you eat like the raw meat? Will you get like parasites?
You can if it's not properly cleaned. I just learned about this. Oh, I just cut open the stomach of the fish. I wanted to see what he was eating.
That's his stomach?
Yep, that's come out of the stomach. So that's out of this small piece right here. Right, this is another thing you can do when you're fishing is see what your fish are eating. You expose the stomach, pull the contents out. A lot of times it's usually small crayfish, minnows, things of that nature. This time of the year I find a lot of small snails and fish.
Really?
Yeah, so it's kind of neat. So I think it's has to do with the season. But yeah, it's just, and trust me, it helps you when you're fishing. You know what to use, you know what they're feeding on.
The snail. Wait, what is that? The snail, that's a stomach.
Bass always got something.
Yeah. So this is a largemouth bass. So this is going to be the easiest to clean of all
Why?
because it's a lot bigger in size. The bone structure is a lot bigger. So where people have a hard time is once you hit the top, right? It's a lot harder to see that line across from the head to the dorsal fin. And again, for me, it's going to come with experience, but you can actually feel your knife grazing those bones up in the front until you reach that fin. So I just feel my knife barely rubbing on them. So just keep working my way down. Hit these two fins, right? I'm going to push that knife through again. Oh, he's been eating well, I guess. So again, following the bone line down. This one's a lot easier. The bones are more prevalent. And if I pull on the fillet, it actually pulls the meat away from the bones. So I'm just going to bring my knife up behind them. Continue on down along the rib cage. I'll do that other side first. So the other thing that's good to help you guys turn you into better fishermen too, it is good to read books about the species that you're after. Certain species have different food targets or food sources. For bass, probably the best bait you're ever going to find for bass, whether it's largemouth or smallmouth, is crayfish. Now, the only thing make sure you do if you do use crayfish, they've got the pinchers on them, and now you can go on YouTube and look at videos of this. But the fish actually remove the pinchers off the crayfish before they consume it, which was very neat. That was something I never seen before.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
And how they know was baffling. But when I seen it, right, I always knew as a kid that my grandpa always told me to break the pincher off.
You ever eat sheephead?
Yes. Yep. Small.
That one up back around.
We'll have to do like a recipes thing.
I'll come over.
Yeah, I'd be game for it. So again, let me look at the stomach content. Yep.
Do fish have tongues?
Yes.
Oh, ta-da!
Yeah. And guess what else they got?
What? Nose.
Nostrils.
For what?
They got sensors in there. They can actually, yeah, exactly.
Is it?
Yes. Yep.
Do they sneeze and the water gets in there?
That part I don't know. But I haven't seen them with a Kleenex yet, right? So.
No, they hadn't. Nostrils.
So. It's just that they breathe water, right? Whereas we breathe air. But it's basically the same thing.
The smell?
Yep.
See, mind blowing, guys.
And I'll tell you what we have in common with fish.
If you cut off
If,
fish eggs, will there be a lot on it?
yeah, they'll kind of they're in a small sack. That's what holds them all together. So if I split it open, they're kind of gonna go all over.
Show us when you're almost done.
Okay. Oh, I was telling you guys, one of the things that we have, anybody know what we have in common with fish? Because there is something we have in common.
Besides the nostrils?
Eyes.
Oh, it has to do with the nostrils, has to do with your tongue.
You have that.
Sinuses.
Who likes salt?
They like salt and things.
Love salt. If you look at most of that, my tackle, it's all impregnated with salt.
Makes sense. Salt and garlic. Sounds like a good dinner.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting though? It's just that it's not that different from people, right? And then,
Smell it, or is it like
no, yeah, they can smell it. They actually, if you have impregnated salts, there's a scent trail that's left from your lures. So a lot of times what fishermen do, and this is really common, more so today than ever before, but they call it lazy fishermen. So this lure here, actually all those body baits there are all laced with salt. They all have salt in them, but as you drag it along the bottom, it leaves a salt trail. And fish can pick up that trail. And if you're in shallow enough water, if you're on a sand bottom, you drag something like this across that bottom, watch the fish as they come up. They'll follow the exact same trail as that your lure went. Pretty neat. Any deer hunters in the group? Any? So, if you think about it, what's the big thing that anybody know what the big thing is they use for deer hunting? Exactly. Yeah. So after you start realizing all these things, right, the world gets a little bit smaller. It's just I find that kind of stuff kind of fascinating. And I like to see how nature reacts to things like that.
So I know there's probably a million ways to cook them, but what's like a really common way to cook the fish?
So we got a batter that we get from the States. It's called Andes, and it's pretty exceptional stuff. It's made in Ohio. It's only available in 3 states. You can either get it from Ohio, Indiana, or Michigan. I know I had people take pictures of it. I think I brought some last year. Was it last year or the year before?
The one with the duck?
It's kind of an orange bag. It says Andes on it, Andes seasoning. Then if you look at the ingredients, I think their secret ingredient is they have a smoked European paprika in it. And I haven't been able to find that stuff anywhere over here. I can't even find it in Michigan either. So I haven't looked at it online. Who wanted to look at the eggs? Right, somebody wanted to look at these. So if you look at that, right, you see all those little white dots.
Holy smoke.
Each one of those little white dots is a fish.
How long has it been pregnant?
That fish will lay those eggs next spring, usually in April, about mid-April. One of the things that, and this is common for most fish species during the reproductive stage, it's based on temperature of the water, right? So generally between 51 and 54 will trigger your perch to start spawning. I know one of the issues in the Detroit rivers with some of the outflows, warm water outflows that they had there, was actually triggering fish to pre-spawn. And then once that source went away, fish went into shock and they all died. Right? So what they had to install in Detroit was what they call cooling ponds. So they had to get the temperature of that water down before they could release it to the river. And the same thing was happening over here in Ontario, up towards Sarnia. They had the same issues there. The hydro plants and the industries in Sarnia. They all had discharge pipes, basically cooling waters for the machines and stuff like that inside the plant. So they've gotten better at those sort of things. They've all created cooling ponds, right? It's trying to work with nature. So just keep that goes from a small scale to a grand scale for corporations, things like that, right? It's taking care of our environment. So we live and we learn as we go along. Anybody have any questions? Anybody ready to clean fish? Okay, you guys do that when you go home. You clean your own fish.
What's a good knife?
A good knife? Knives vary. So I've got two different styles here, right? This is they have my Canadian Tire. It's a soft rubber handle. It's got the groove for your finger, right? So you're more comfortable grip. It depends though. Depends on a lot of fish that you catch. I do have smaller ones. This one's from the States. Kind of a thicker base. This is more of a heavy knife, right? Stiff, whereas this one is a lot softer. The advantage of having a soft blade, right, is you have an easier time getting around the bones of the fish, whereas something like this, chances are a lot greater you're going to cut right through the bones because this knife doesn't have any give in it. So that's a good question. And then remember, just keeping your knife sharp creates less accidents. I know it sounds funny, but when you're cleaning a fish, the easier your knife has going through the meat of the fish, then the easier it is to clean. Whereas a dull knife, you're going to be sawing, you're going to be pushing extremely hard. That's when most accidents happen. Walpole this year just got back, or just had an election. So in this election, I was renominated. So I took 4 terms off from council. So I was an elected official before in my community. I did serve 4 terms previously. So why I took the break was I actually got nominated for chief. So I ran for chief in the last 3 elections. The 4th one I didn't get nominated as chief. I got nominated for council. So re-elected to council. So each of my runnings for chief, I was just off the margin by just ever so slight. So the first time I ran, I was 26 votes short of becoming a chief. So as I mentioned earlier, this was something I didn't plan on. I love to hunt, I love to fish, I love to gab with people. Kind of all over the place. I got involved with our administration. So I did roughly about 16 years in Walpole administration. So I served as a waste management officer. I served 13 years as an environment officer. I did 2 years as a game warden field officer. I did 2 years as a supervisor for that same department, for our natural resources department. So I've done a variety of things. I've also gotten involved again on a community level. I've done fishing tournaments, fundraisers, baseball, did some tennis for a little while. Oh, what else was there? There was a lot. I got involved in a lot of community initiatives. And some of this stuff, and I'm not trying to brag or nothing, it's just to give you an idea of kind of who I am. You guys can actually Google my name. And my nephew was the first one to show me this. But I came up on roughly about 1,300 sites. So I've done other speaking engagements, both in the United States and in Canada. And why I say Canada, I've been to the West Coast in BC on speaking engagements there. Anybody know what Emerald Ash Borer is? So the second positive in Canada was Wappo Island. It was my job to put a team of people together to learn how to survey, learn the biology of this bug. And we were actually considered experts a year and a half in. And because I got that label, they started to ship me out across the United States and then different areas in Ontario. So one of the things that happened, and this is going to speak to government. So at that time, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA in Ontario, had the lead role in how to best manage this invasive beetle. So when it came to Walpole, we kind of ended up bunting heads. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but they created this line across southwestern Ontario, what they called the ash-free zone. It was government mandated. Every ash tree for a 5-kilometer width from Lake St. Clair to Lake Erie had to be cut. And this was to stop the beetle from further going into Ontario. So at that time, and I had to roll through all the information as we started to figure things out, the biology of this beetle. So during mating season, what these beetles would do is these trees here, so you see a set of trees here, that beetle would fly about 2 meters above that tree. And they would do it for roughly 20 to 25 minutes at a time, and it would drop down as they were looking for mates. So the problem with that is, with the infestation being Windsor, Detroit, the dominant wind for Wappo Island is southwest. Puts us directly downwind of Windsor, Detroit area. So when you start to realize things like that and you start to put it together, it's like you understand why we were the second on infestation in Ontario. And actually the death of our trees here were 1 year behind the death of the trees in Windsor, Detroit. Right? So the theory was by the scientists was that these beetles couldn't cross over water. And this is no way it can happen. It's like, no, it did. It had to have. And I said, under a good southwest wind, I said, that beetle will be across the lake. And I said, in less than 2 minutes. And I said, makes complete sense. So the argument went on, right? So now it's First Nation government, Ontario government, federal government of Canada, United States government. We were all going at it, right? And everybody had their own theory. So I was just paying attention to what the information was telling me. So sure enough, the beetle makes it to Marine City, Michigan. A year later, infestation is found in Sombra, directly across the river. So that verified that what my original theory was that they would cross over water. So I knew when they created the ash-free zone, guess what? A year later, the beetle is across that 5-kilometer stretch. So they do utilize the wind to spread out. And the unfortunate thing is, nature is harsh sometimes, right? And this actually spurred on a dispute between each of these governments, and we were in the thick of it. So trees, we basically had to let the trees die here. And that was the position that Walpole took. I know for our agency, for our natural resources department, I was in the lead role at that time. And we went, this wasn't planned, it just happened. We had national television out there. We had CBC on site. And we brought all the leaders of each department together, right? So reporters started asking questions. They're creating the ash-free zone. The head of the CFIA, which was Mr. Ken Marchant at the time, says, no, Walpole's included in that ash-free zone. We're cutting all their trees too. So when that hit my ears, I was opposed to it right away. I said, no, you're not. And he goes, oh no. He goes, this is mandated by the federal government. You have to. And we were doing this right over live television. And I said, no, we're not. And I said, and I'll tell you exactly why. I said, first off, Walpole Island at the time was home to 77 endangered species. I said, answer me this. I said, because that's protected by federal legislation. I said, how can you guarantee that you're not going to kill endangered species by going in and cutting all these trees down? I said, we have plants, we have animals. I said, we have insects that are all endangered. And he just stopped. Right? And he goes, I can't answer that. 5 minutes later, it was, we need to rethink what we're going to do with Walpole Island. So I took a First Nation standpoint. I told them, you have to give Mother Nature the opportunity to catch up to this beetle. I said, something will utilize it. It's always going to be a part of our environment. But if you don't ever give Mother Nature that chance to figure out on how things are going to proceed in the future, I said, then we're just going to cause further problems, right? So this speaks a lot to First Nation government. We were not a people of policy, right? We were a people of the process of the environment. And there's a difference. So we refer to First Nations law as the Great Law, which meaning Mother Nature is going to determine on how we live our lives. You can either be a part of it or not, right? Life can be simple or life can be tough. And today, that standard is still the same. So I've had former chiefs tell me was that the founding principles were always going to be the same, right? And how we administer it today is going to be different. So the way I grew up back in the 70s and 80s, right? I've seen those changes and I've learned to adapt from one decade to the next. You guys are going to do the same. Stuff that you think is neat now is going to be old technology one day, right? But the founding principles are going to be the same. It's still going to be something you enjoy, whether it be reading or whatever, what have you, right? There's those sort of things that kind of come into play, and you're going to see this within government. Anybody been following the election in the United States? So I have. Don't ask me why, but I find those things fascinating. I'm not for either candidate, but what I watch is process. And what they're doing over there has never been seen, and I've been making my kids kind of watch it. Now they watch it on their own, at least for the last couple of days, because things are getting exciting. But they're paying attention to the process. This is going to apply to every aspect in your life, and you're going to see the link from your life to your government, right? And the importance of voting. So just on any majority of First Nations, we vote there too. We're under an electoral process under the Indian Act. So the neat thing is about process, looking at what's going on in the United States, right, is you look at the division in people. This is where it makes a link to you guys personally. The same thing happens here in Canada and Ontario in your municipal governments, right, in the town of Walsburg, right? I actively participate in those things. And the reason why I do is it allows me to have my opinion put out there. If you don't participate, right, then I always tell people, well, don't complain. You're happy with the way things are, which is fair enough, right? Some people say, well, I got better things to do, and most people do. But those opportunities are there, and you're going to see that's going to lead into many more things. That's been my experience. Being vocal helps. Don't be shy. I always tell people, don't be shy, right? Some of my kids started out that way, but they actually got to be very involved. John, I think, is aware of a couple of them. Some are almost your age. But anyway, so getting involved and looking at those types of issues, recognizing what's going on, I think, is more important. How people react is very important. Be involved in debate. It's extremely important, no matter what side of the fence you sit on, or if you sit on the fence. I think every person's opinion is valid. It's not only a right that you have, but I think it's important that you share it as well. Because how are other people to know? And it's going to be a collaboration of ideas on how we move forward. That's kind of where we're at today in any government in modern day society. Is that you're finally starting to see that collaboration. Because I remember the 70s and 80s, it was my way or the highway. It was, I'm right, you're wrong. That was the mentality back then, and that's how government handled itself. It was very cruel, it was very harsh. Today you're seeing that change, and it's what they say is happening now is the millennials, which is you guys. You're seeing that attitude change, what I think is a good thing, because it creates more opportunity for all of us. And that's the purpose of a government. Create opportunity, make things better, and then also take care of what we have. So, is there any wannabe politicians yet? I know when I got into WDSS, grade 9, I knew I wanted to be a politician. I didn't know why, but I just had that drive. And I got involved with student council. I got involved with many other small clubs and stuff at WDSS. So participate in those sort of things. You get to meet people. This is the great thing about government too. Networking, you're going to meet people from across North America. If you're that kind of individual, get into it. Take opinions with a grain of salt. Don't let things bother you. I don't. Life is short, right? But have an appreciation for those opinions. Because if everybody agreed with you, life would be boring. So there's a different way, a good way to look at things. And I would recommend that you do it that way. And life will be just that much better. So at this point, anybody got any questions about First Nation government?
So these guys are, a bunch of the grade 12s are writing a research paper right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 4 or 5 of them that are writing on the Indian Act. Right now a lot of them are taking the position that it's problematic for First Nations people. But I'm sure a bunch of them would be curious on your position on how the Indian Act is impacting local governance or communities.
Yes. So the Indian Act is a very old piece of legislation. At the time, going back to the early 1800s, a lot of that, the basis of the Indian Act was to confine First Nations people in Canada. Right? So this is kind of, it hasn't stemmed from the treaty. The treaty process was different. These are two different, completely different animals, okay? So the way it's defined at the time in the Canadian government was the Indian Act was there to deal with the Indian problem. So if you look at the basis behind that policy, that law, right, was basically to control Native people in Canada. Put them on small reservations, and which they determined or built up as kind of, you know, this is some of the best land in Canada, we're going to give it to you, right? So under that basis, the Indian Act was there to say, this is how you're going to live your life. This is how you have to move forward into the future, right? So the ultimate goal was to take the Indian out of Native people. That was the ultimate goal. Now there are components, and this is kind of hindsight, right, of the Indian Act. And this is why you'll hear some Native people, especially the older generations, say that it's still valid today, that there's good things in the Indian Act. And it just depends on your point of view, but I think it's right. I think they're right. Because there's a piece of that legislation that guarantees that the reservation is always going to belong to Native people. Now, this is where governance kind of gets a little funny for First Nation, and any First Nation person knows that by today's process, we have to have what they call a status card. We refer to it as an Indian card. And it says we're status natives of Canada. The problem is that these cards expire. So the question's been posed to me, and I've been facing this for roughly about 8 years, maybe 6, where that if that card expires, does that mean I am no longer a native of Canada? Right? Interesting question. I'd love to hear the variety of debates around that. Right? Because physically, I'm not. I'm always going to be a Native person. My father was Native, my mother was Native, my grandparents are Native. They're just from different areas of North America. So, interesting debate to have on that same note. I'm also a registered Potawatomi. Walpole Island has papers that are roughly about 140, maybe 150 years old. And they have a list of every individual that's of Potawatomi descent. So every now and then you'll hear of a Potawatomi gathering on Walpole Island. Well, guess what? I'm a part of that. And all my kids are registered Potawatomi. I didn't even know this thing existed. I found out when I was like 22, 23. It's like, Kennon, you're a registered Potawatomi. Well, what's that, right? So it's interesting. Again, it's a piece of governance structure, modern times. You'll get Native people that are very vocal, and I think most times in a demeaning way. But I think a lot of this, and I like to speak about this stuff, is because there's a lot of things that were never told. There's a lot of things that were put into the education system that weren't right. So one of the biggest problems I had at WDSS, it took me 3 years to pass grade 9 history, right? Because I knew what was in that book, what they said about Native people was wrong. I knew what was in there was a lie. And poor Mr. Terry had me for 3 years. And it was interesting. I remember this being in a 110 gym during an exam, my 3rd year in grade 9 history. He walked up to me. All the kids were all sitting at a desk right in our exam. He walked right up to me and he goes, Kennon, I want you to lie. asking you to lie. He goes, I want you to get past grade 9 history because it was a compulsory credit, right? So I had to have it. And all the kids around me, and a lot of them were my friends, right, just kind of gasp. Everybody's looking at me because this came out of Mr. Terry's mouth. I walked out of that class, or that exam, my final grade was a 92, right? But I had witnesses. And I think that's what mattered to me, right? I'm all about the truth. Be it good, be it bad, long as it's the truth. And I've always held myself in that way. There's other teachers, I don't know, is Mr. Lidstone still there? Oh, that guy would have nightmare stories about me. I always said I'm the guy that broke him in his first time in WDSS. He was an art teacher there. So anyways, you ever run into Mr. Lidstone, ask him about Kennon Johnson. And he'll probably laugh, and then he might cry. But, so there's that perspective, right, exists within First Nation government, provincial government, federal government. Those kind of relationships are there, kind of a love-hate type thing. But they always say that the history is bad. And like I said, bad, good is okay. Let's not make the same mistake twice, right, in moving forward. So with that being said, I'll be doing for time. 2?
1:30.
1:30?
One other quick question for you, though, that I think
Yep.
you guys would want to hear about is, how do you make decisions? So, like, when you are trying to create policy or you're trying to do something for the community, how does the council make decisions?
Okay, so we're in that process right now. So being a new council coming in, there's 6 brand new councillors at the table. Looking at policy and policy structure, kind of depends on which issue it is, right? So there's different approaches. Standard process is that the idea or issue will be tabled. There's 12 councillors and a chief sitting around that table. We're all going to debate this issue. What I see happening now is better than the first time I was on council, in that there are some things that they say you never talk about. And this is kind of coming from the old generations. It's like those sort of things, what people would say is, you shouldn't talk about that, right? And you guys probably heard this when you were younger too. Your parents would look at you, or your grandparents, like, don't talk about that, right? You keep that to yourself. That's changed at that table. So things that you don't normally talk about, you start to talk about. And this is going back to putting the truth on the table, right? To me, you get better, more effective policy from that direction. But you kind of got to look at politics too. And this is where things get a little complicated. So I could table an issue here today. Each one of you all going to have a different idea. And it may not be a solution, but your perspective on that particular issue, everybody's going to have their own thought. And again, going back to old style politics, right, was, well, that's, I don't agree with you, so we're going to shove your idea aside. They don't do that no more. It's like everybody casts their idea into the middle, right? And let's try to come up with the best policy that we can to resolving an issue. And it debates, right? But it's the chief's responsibility to pull that collaboration of ideas together to form policy. So to me, that's...
Or like how does that after the put out, or is it a consensus, or how does it?
No, it does go to a vote. They seldom ever do consensus anymore. Because the one thing that's going to happen, and again, you have to appreciate this, is that you're not going to agree with everything that happens. Just like your government, right? Just like the municipality, Ontario, your federal government. You're not going to agree with everything that they do. And to me, that's fine. I think that's a good thing. That's the way the process is. But if you can come up with the best rationale ever between a collaboration of ideas, that's more suitable to everybody. But my perspective on those types of matters, I don't think that there's one general rule that's good for all of Canada. I think there are general rules that are good for regions. So, like the environmental issues we have here in southwestern Ontario aren't going to be applicable to northern Ontario, right? So that's where you got to recognize those differences by region. So the way I look at it is, what's good for Walpole Island is not good for Six Nations, right? And you also have cultural impacts. So their worldview is different from the worldview we have on Walpole Island. So it's not to say that one's better than the other, one's right or one's wrong. It's suitable for the region or the community, right? So those sort of things got to be recognized as well. And that's one of the things I look at. So I know I went to a conference 4 years ago, and it was over what they call, how was it? It's basically land base. Okay, so Walpole Island has an area which they call Aboriginal title lands. So it's kind of the historic lands in which the people of Walpole Island that they utilize around them. Right, so Six Nations has the same thing, and we met on this big land issue because we actually had overlapping. So what they did was they looked at Walpole Island, Sarnia, Kettle Point. They looked at each of those First Nations was actually all the same people. We all came from the original reserve. They just, government broke us up later on down the road. But our territory expanded into Toronto. And guess what? Six Nations in Brantford area, their Aboriginal title lands went from Windsor clear on up to the St. Lawrence, right? So when we went to this conference, or when I went to this conference, I think it was day one, just prior to lunch, I was accused of going up there wanting to steal Six Nation land. And I was like, whoa, right? There's a couple individuals coming to this meeting and point right at me. You're here to steal our land. I was like, no. So I'm not here to steal anybody's land. I was like, I'm here to look at the issues that you have and the issues, to share the issues that I have. And how can we come up with similar solutions? That's what I'm here for. I said, I don't know nothing about stealing land. And I said, I don't know how you would steal land anyway. I said, because from my perspective is, the land is there for you to utilize, but don't think you're taking it once you're gone from this world. Anything you own, you're leaving behind, right? So for me, that was my perspective, my approach to anything, right? I'm trying to set it so I think about the generations coming after me. And that's what's kind of unique about First Nation government, right? That's the perspective we're supposed to have. They talk about the 7 generations. You're supposed to be looking 7 generations down the road, right? So the policy that we develop, how is that best suited to managing today? Because we know it's going to change tomorrow, right? It's not the same as when I was little. But you got to give recognition to how it transforms as time goes on. So it's very applicable in everyday life. If you start to recognize those things, your perspective's going to change. But I think it makes you a better individual at the end of the day too. So that's kind of how I look at things, right? That's a First Nations modern day government. So things are always improving, getting better. We're getting back together as kind of a communal whole, right? But we're starting to expanding and build relationships off the reserve. So Walpole's been very close to Walsburg. And just another experience that I had, and this one will probably freak you out because it freaked me out. So the first time I came to W.T. Lang, which is I think just a grass field now, the building's gone. So I went there in grade 7, right? There was the last of the kids that got transferred from Walpole Island into town, because Walpole used to only go to grade 5. After grade 5, you had to come to Walsburg to finish up your schooling. So Walpole was building up the school when I was there. But my mother told me in grade 6, so I went to grade 6 on Walpole. They were in process of building grade 7. She goes, I'm sending you to Walsburg anyway.